The belt cracked before her knees did, but the woman didn't cry. She just looked past her husband to the giant rancher, 7 feet muscular, watching from the road, his fists curling around reins like they were sins he couldn't speak yet. Dust hung in the air like old judgment, slow to settle and eager to sting. Noon pressed hard on the wood-plank street of Dust Hollow, a town worn thin by droughts of water, mercy, and men who remembered how to be gentle. The silence that followed each snap of leather was heavier than the sound itself. No one moved, no one helped. A shopkeeper swept the same corner of porchwood for the 3rd time, head down. A child peeked from behind a barrel, then ducked. Ilara Finch stood barefoot on the sun-baked dirt, her shift torn down the back and blooming dark at the spine. 18. Yet she held herself like something older, something that had survived many endings already. Her skin shimmered with sweat, dirt, and blood. Her lip was cracked, but her eyes, those wild gray things, didn't blink. Silas Blackwood's voice rose like a bitter hymn. You want to act like some... You get treated like one. Ain't no man wanting you now. Just look what you cost me. His face was red with drink and heat. His gut strained against his belt. Behind him, a nearly empty whiskey bottle waited like a reward. The giant rancher, 7 feet muscular, across the road didn't know her name. Not yet. But his horse had stopped on its own, sensing something in the air that spooked it, something invisible but sharp. The giant rancher, 7 feet muscular, was young, 24, with a sun-creased face and calloused hands gripping worn leather. Cale Stone, known mostly for saying little and failing at nearly everything since his father died. He had not come to town for justice. He had come to sell a bundle of hides and see if he could afford another winter. But there are moments, few and rare, when a man's heart forgets to stay hidden, when it leaps uninvited, before reason catches it. Silas raised the belt again. The crowd had begun to drift, but Cale's voice cut through them, quiet but clear. Sell her to me. The town froze. Silas turned, sneering. What? Cale dismounted. His boots hit dirt, solid and steady. He walked across the road with a kind of calm that silences dogs. I said, sell her to me. I need a wife. You need coin. Seems we got a trade. Silas laughed big and open-mouthed. Boy, you serious? Cale dropped a small pouch to the dirt. It hit with a dull clink, the sound of metal against dust, a week's worth of winter feed, maybe more, every coin he had left. Ilara's eyes flicked toward it, then back to Cale's. Fine, Silas spat. She ain't worth spit, but she's yours. He shoved her forward. Take her, just don't bring her back. Ilara stumbled, catching herself on scraped palms. She looked up, not with thanks, not with hope, but with a quiet that throbbed. Cale pulled off his coat, draped it around her shoulders without touching skin. Her whole body flinched. Anyway, we go now, he said simply. Silas snorted and turned back to his bottle. The crowd thinned, relieved to be done with it, to tuck the ugliness back under their porches and polite smiles. Kyle helped Ilara onto his horse, his hands gentle as a question he didn't ask. He didn't speak on the ride out of town, nor did she. The road stretched like a prayer, dry, broken, but leading away. By the time they reached the edge of Dust Hollow, the sun was leaning west. The land yawned wide and gold. Ilara clung to the horn of the saddle, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. Blood had dried on the back of her dress, and flies had found her, but she made no complaint. Cale led the horse on foot. He didn't look at her, not because he was ashamed, but because something in her stillness felt sacred, like a wounded hawk you don't dare touch unless it asks. His ranch sat low against the prairie, more fence post than fence, more shadow than roof. A tired windmill creaked overhead. 2 goats bleated from a crooked pen. The place was not much, but it was his. Inside he lit a lantern. The kitchen was sparse but clean. He showed her the spare room, left a folded blanket, a tin cup of water, a slice of bread. He stood in the doorway a long beat before speaking. You don't owe me. Ilara didn't answer. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. That night, Cale sat on the porch. The stars came in slow, shy waves. He rolled a cigarette he didn't light and listened to the wind rattle the bones of his quiet life. He'd been alone too long. Now, a stranger rested beneath his roof, one who had been traded like stock and hadn't shed a tear. Inside, Ilara sat on the floor, back against the wall, legs drawn to her chest. She didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and whispered her mother's name over and over, as if trying to conjure her back. Her hands trembled, but her face remained still. Near midnight, a coyote howled somewhere past the hills. Cale heard it and finally lit the cigarette, the spark briefly illuminating his tired eyes. Then a sound, barely a sound, threaded through the boards. A gasp, a name, and then, "Please don't let him come back." Kyle froze. Ash fell from his hand to the porch floor, and for the first time in years, the silence around him didn't feel like peace. It felt like a warning. By morning, the wind had changed. It no longer scratched like regret, but moved softer, almost like a hush between two people who didn't know what to say. Ilara stood on the porch in Kyle's coat, too big for her shoulders, and stared out across the brittle fields, where nothing grew without a fight. Her hair clung to the bruises along her neck. She didn't reach to fix it. Let the wind move it where it pleased. Inside, Cale stood by the stove, shoulders stiff, frying cornbread in a pan that hadn't been used in weeks. He hadn't slept. The old clock ticked like boots down a church aisle. He listened, not for threats, but for the silence from the other room, a silence that hadn't stirred once all night. He set the plate on the table, stepped out, and nodded toward the food. "Eat when you can." Ilara didn't move. Her arms were crossed beneath the coat, her eyes distant, not vacant, watchful, measuring him the way a cornered animal might measure a trap that smells of kindness. Kyle didn't approach. He left the door open and walked to the barn, his boots crunching over dry earth. The morning felt wrong in his chest, like wearing another man's shirt, familiar but off. He mucked the stalls, fixed the latch on the chicken gate, mended a split rail with hands that remembered better times, times when sweat didn't mean survival, when home meant more than just the place you returned to alone. Inside, Ilara crept toward the table. She didn't touch the food, only looked at the tin cup beside it. Clear water, no dirt, no floaters. It struck her strange, the care in something so basic. She took a sip, one small sip, and felt it coat her dry throat like a whisper that said, "You're still here." When Cale returned, she was gone from the porch. But the coat was folded, the cornbread half-eaten. He didn't smile, but he breathed easier. They moved like ghosts around each other the next few days. Quiet, careful. He worked the land. She swept the dust from floors that would never shine. He repaired tools. She repaired seams. Neither asked questions. Neither explained why the silence between them felt like the only safe place left in the world. On the third night, the storm came. No thunder, just wind and dust slamming into the house like a fist full of nails. Cale rushed to tie the barn doors. Ilara stood frozen at the window, eyes wide, hands clenched at her sides. When he returned, soaked and coughing. She was curled in the corner of the main room, rocking like a woman half her age. "I thought it was him," she whispered, voice hoarse. Kyle said nothing, just knelt beside her and placed a blanket over her shoulders. His hand lingered, then withdrew. He didn't ask who. He didn't have to. In the flickering lantern light, she spoke again. "You didn't ask where I came from. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She looked at him, then really looked, for the first time since he took her from the dirt, and for a moment she wasn't afraid. "Do you think I'm ruined?" she asked softly. He stood slowly, rubbed the back of his neck. "I think a man has to be real small to think that." Outside, the storm passed, but something else shifted too. Something between them. Not trust, not yet, but a single thread, knotted at both ends. The next day, Ilara had a tin cup by his plate, fresh coffee, bitter but warm. Kyle nodded once. No thanks passed between them, but she stayed a little longer at the table before retreating to the porch. He noticed the stiffness in her walk, the bruises on her arms that hadn't yet faded, the way she flinched at shadows. That afternoon, a horse approached the ranch gate. Ilara bolted upright, but it wasn't Silas, just one of the Dust Hollow men. Finn, older, bitter, wrapped in gossip like a second skin. He eyed Ilara like she was livestock. Cale stepped between them. "Need something?" "Just came to see if you were serious," Finn said, smirking. "Heard you bought yourself a broken woman. Some folks say she'll curse your land." Cale's voice was flat. This land was cursed long before she came. Finn snorted and rode off, spitting in the dirt. Ilara didn't speak. She just walked back inside, her face blank. But that night, Cale found a scrap of parchment on the table. A single line scrolled in uneven ink. "I am not what he said I am." He read it twice, then folded it carefully, tucked it in his jacket pocket like something rare. Later, under a sky blistered with stars, Ilara sat on the porch, arms wrapped around her knees. "You believe me?" she asked. Cale didn't turn from the stars. "I didn't need a note to." A long pause. "I ain't ever been kissed without pain," she said, barely louder than breath. He looked at her then, the way the moon lit her face, bruises softening to memory. He didn't move closer, didn't speak, but he took off his hat, placed it over his chest, and gave her the kind of silence that listens. Inside, the wind tapped once at the window, then left them alone. And in the far distance, a rider paused at the ridge, watching the house, a bottle glinting at his side, the past not quite finished. The soil around Cale's ranch didn't give easily. It cracked like old hands, resisting seed and sweat both, but Ilara knelt in it anyway, bare knees pressed to dust, fingers digging careful hollows in the earth. She had brought out scraps of herbs, salvaged from the saddlebag he never used. Dill, sage, and something she only remembered from her mother's kitchen before Dust Hollow turned her body into trade and her name into gossip. Now she planted them in silence like prayers no one else needed to understand. Cale watched from the fence line. Hammer paused mid-swing. Her face was smudged, her wrists bandaged from where rope had once bitten, but her hands moved like they still believed something would grow. She didn't know he'd noticed. He didn't know she saw him leave a folded kerchief beside the porch steps before sunrise so she'd have something clean to wrap her bruises with if needed. Each day was stitched from small things. He fixed the door latch that stuck. She swept the porch when no one asked her to. He left her a slice of pie, too burnt for pride, too honest to be bought. She ate it all the same, and once when he passed her in the narrow hallway, their shoulders brushed, just barely, but she didn't flinch. That night she left a sprig of mint by his plate, still damp with soil. Some things in this life didn't need to be spoken to be felt. The town, however, found ways to speak loud without saying much. Finn and the others made sure of that. Word had spread like spilled whiskey. Cale Stone, the giant rancher, 7 feet muscular, bought a broken woman for coin. Let her stay. Let her touch his things. Let her rot his land. Men whispered. Women stared. A preacher's wife left a Bible at the edge of his property line like a warning. Ilara saw it first, didn't touch it, just looked at him and said, "You want me gone?" Kyle, tightening the straps on his saddle, paused. "Is that what you want?" "I didn't ask what I wanted." He turned slowly, dirt on his hands, jaw tense. "You deserve to." The wind stirred. The mint leaves beside the door fluttered like small green flags. That night, Cale sat on the porch with his boots off, rubbing a blister with his thumb. Ilara joined him, arms crossed against the cooling dark. For a long while they said nothing. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was waiting, shaped like something that might grow legs if left too long. "Why didn't you marry before?" she asked softly, eyes on the moon. He chuckled low. "Didn't have time or money or the kind of face women wrote poems about." She smiled, the smallest flicker like a match unwilling to die. Maybe they weren't looking close enough. He didn't answer, but he did reach into his pocket and pull out the folded parchment she'd written on days ago. Still carried it, still creased like something sacred. "You believe everything people say?" he asked. "Only when they say it, with their fists." The words lingered. He wanted to ask what Silas had said with his, what had been stolen, what still ached. But some pain doesn't want to be unburied, and she had already buried so much. The next morning he found her sewing one of his shirts by the window. The fabric was old, the thread was red. "You know red don't match," he said, half smiling. "I know," she replied, "but you'll remember who mended it." Outside, a rider passed on the ridge again. Same one. Kyle caught the silhouette through the barn slats. The horse was black. The rider's bottle shined in the morning sun. Kyle didn't move, but his jaw set firm. Ilara noticed. "You expecting company?" "No, but sometimes it comes anyway." Later that week, they shared a breakfast for the first time at the same table. He poured her coffee. She buttered his bread. It felt less like a transaction and more like a rhythm. Two broken clocks ticking in sync for once. "I'll try to make soap," she said, brushing flour from her sleeve. "There's lye under the porch. You don't have to do that." "I know," she said, "but I want the smell of his hands off me." He didn't ask whose. He already knew. That night, the wind rose again, but not enough to frighten. Ilara stepped outside barefoot, feeling the dirt with her sole. She crouched near the herb patch, now struggling to rise. The sage had browned. The dill refused to sprout, but the mint clung to life, stubborn. She pressed her palm to the soil, eyes closing, whispering something too soft for the wind to carry. Behind her, Cale approached with 2 mugs in hand. He paused when he saw her hand resting gently on the earth, like she was asking it to remember her kindly. "You ever talk to the dirt?" he asked. "All the time?" she replied. "It's the only thing that knows what's buried." He handed her the mug. She took it. Their fingers brushed again. This time, she didn't pull away. "I can't promise nothing," he said quietly. "Not safety, not clean names. Not even that you'll want to stay." She looked up at him, eyes shadowed but steady. "I didn't want a promise," she said. "I wanted someone who didn't flinch when I was filthy." And then in the distance, a gunshot echoed once, sharp and distant from the direction of Dust Hollow. They both turned. Neither moved, but in her eyes something dark flickered. She knew that sound, and who might be following it. The morning came mean. Wind gnawed through the eaves, and the fence, already weary, gave up one of its rails without protest. Kyle stood ankle-deep in churned mud and splintered wood, staring at the mess like it had betrayed him. The goats bleated from their pen, skittish from the noise. Something about the storm last night had changed the feel of the place. It wasn't just the damage, it was the weight in the air, the kind that came before something worse. Ilara came out barefoot, her braid loose, hands smudged with flour. She didn't ask permission. She knelt beside him, picked up a post, and held it steady. Together, they worked without a word. Nails, wood, breath. Her palms blistered fast, but she didn't complain, just braced and pressed and moved when he did. "You don't have to help," Kyle said finally, his voice low. "I'm tired of being something people do things to," she answered, wiping sweat from her brow with her sleeve. "I want to do something with someone, even if it's fixing fences." He looked at her then, not just at the curve of her jaw or the quiet grit in her knuckles, but at the strange strength she carried, like a flame cupped in cold hands, fragile but determined to live. When the last post was hammered in, they sat side by side on the grass. Dirt streaked across their arms. Ilara's breathing was shallow but even. Her eyes scanned the land like she didn't quite trust it. "Was that shot from town?" Cale asked. Ilara nodded. "Silas doesn't like being embarrassed, especially not by a man younger than him." Cale's jaw twitched. "You think he'll come?" "I know he will." The wind bent the prairie grass in waves. Somewhere far off, a hawk circled. The horizon had the feel of something watching back. Later, Ilara stood at the wash basin, scrubbing Cale's shirt with steady rhythm. The red-threaded mends stood out like a wound on white fabric. She caught her own reflection in the water, lips pale, eyes ringed with shadows, and didn't look away. Kyle watched from the doorway. "You don't have to be strong all the time." "I ain't," she said. "You just haven't seen me fall yet." He stepped in slowly, a cloth in his hand. He dipped it in the water, wrung it out, and handed it to her. "Then lean when you do." That evening they sat on the porch again. The space between them was smaller now. Not gone, but smaller. The sky was soft with lavender and ash, the kind of dusk that made the world feel gentle, even if only for a breath. Ilara rested her chin on her knees, watching the goats chew. "You ever think about leaving?" "Every time I walk into Dust Hollow," Kyle said. "But my father built this place. I guess I stayed out of loyalty, then out of habit. And now," he paused, "now I stay because you're here." She blinked, then smiled faintly. It wasn't the kind of smile that needed answering, just the kind that settled into your chest and made a home there. When the sun finally dipped behind the hills, they went inside. Ilara lit the lantern. Kyle unlatched the windows to let the breeze through. It was the rhythm of people who had started to trust each other with silence until a rock shattered the glass beside Ilara's hand. She yelped, ducking instinctively, eyes wide with the old fear. Kyle rushed to the window, rifle in hand, but saw only shadows on the ridge. No rider this time, just a message. Ilara crouched on the floor, glass in her skirt, lips trembling. "He's close." Kyle lowered the rifle, jaw clenched. He doesn't get to cross this line. The next morning, Cale spent hours setting new nails, new rails, marking his land like it was a promise. Ilara brought him water, her eyes scanning the horizon every few minutes. "I want to do something for you," she said. "You already are." "No," she said, stepping closer. "Not because I feel safe here, but because I want you to feel safe with me." He looked up, sweat dripping from his brow. "You want me to ask you something, don't you?" She nodded slow. "Ask me anything but to forget." That night they shared soup at the table. Her hands were bandaged. His arm ached, but they ate like they had earned it. She reached for his bowl to refill it. He stopped her hand just for a moment. Their eyes met. "You can stay," he said quietly. "Not because I bought you, but because I see you." She nodded, but her voice cracked. "Then I want to be seen every day." She went to bed early. Cale sat on the porch, rifle by his side. The stars blinked down like distant answers. And from the woods behind the house, a match flared in the dark. Silas was closer than he'd ever been. A coyote howled once, far off and hollow, just before the match went dark. Kyle didn't move. He sat on the porch with his rifle resting against his knee, boots flat to the boards, eyes scanning the edge of the woods like he'd been waiting his whole life for this. The stars above were thin and cruel, like old witnesses that had seen too much to care. Somewhere behind him, Ilara stirred in her room. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that arrives right before thunder. He stood and stepped off the porch, moving without sound, like a man who knew the weight of every creak in the wood. Gravel whispered under his boots as he walked the path to the fence. He didn't call out. He didn't threaten. He just waited, and the dark answered. Silas emerged like a stain. Bottle in one hand, a pistol in the other. He was alone. The other men had peeled off after the last time Cale stared them down. But Silas had liquor now, and pride to burn. His shirt was torn at the collar, his eyes bleary, his walk unstable but mean. "I came for what's mine," he slurred, raising the pistol half-heartedly. "You bought her like cattle, but she's still Blackwood blood. You can't rewrite that with some fancy fence." Cale said nothing. His hand never left the rifle. Silas spit. "She made me a laughingstock. That woman stood there and let you play the savior. Told people I beat her. Lied. She didn't lie. Silas's grin turned sour. You think she's some angel now? You think she's clean just 'cause you scrubbed her up and gave her a bed? Cale's voice was steady, even. I think she's stronger than you'll ever be. That landed. Silas stepped closer, finger tightening on the trigger. You think you can hide her from me forever? She's got my name. She ain't got it no more. Silas raised the pistol. Then maybe I take you instead. The click of Cale's rifle cocking echoed across the field. The sound was clean. Final. If you shoot, Kyle said, one of us dies. But I promise it won't be her. There was a pause, a shifting of breath, of balance, and then a door creaked open behind them. Elara stepped into the moonlight, barefoot, hair down in the same tattered dress she wore the day Cale found her. But her eyes, those storm-colored eyes, were sharp now, clear. She walked past Cale, slow, deliberate. He didn't stop her. Silas's pistol dropped a little, uncertain. You want to hit me again? She said, voice cutting through the night like a blade. Go on, try. Silas flinched like the words had teeth. I used to beg, she continued. I begged you to stop, begged you to love me, to treat me like your wife, not your debt. You didn't listen then, so now you're going to listen to this. She stepped closer until the muzzle of his pistol was inches from her ribs. You beat me, and I still didn't break, but he gave me silence, and I grew. Silas's hand trembled. You're not angry because I left, she said. You're angry because someone saw me and didn't look away. The pistol dipped, and that's when Kyle moved. One shot, not to kill. The bullet struck Silas's wrist. His hand exploded open like a dropped bottle. The pistol hit the ground. He cried out, staggered back, clutching the wound, eyes wild. Kyle lowered the rifle, breath held like a prayer. Elara didn't move. She just watched as Silas fell to his knees, gasping, bleeding, whimpering like a child who didn't understand why the world didn't bend to him anymore. You never get to raise your hand to me again, she said, not even in memory. The law didn't come. No one from Dust Hollow did, and in the quiet that followed, even the trees seemed to draw breath and hold it. Kyle picked up the pistol, unloaded it, and tossed it into the dirt beside the man who used to own her name. Ride out, he said, and if you ever come back, don't bother bringing bullets. You won't get a second warning. Silas staggered to his feet, eyes dark with a mix of hatred and humiliation. He didn't speak. He only turned, bleeding and limping, into the dark, his pride leaking behind him like blood on dust. The porch light glowed behind them. Elara exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to shake the air around her. She turned to Cale. Thank you, she whispered. He shook his head, voice hoarse. You did that. She stepped closer. No, I survived. But you. She reached for his hand, the one still trembling slightly from the shot. She took it in both of hers, gentle but sure. You gave me space to be, and no one ever did that before. They stood like that for a while, the wind brushing past them like it was trying to memorize the moment. Later, she washed his hands at the basin. His knuckles were raw, hers weren't much better. She dried them with a red-threaded shirt she had mended. It smelled of sage and soap. That night, they didn't sit on opposite sides of the porch. They sat side by side. She rested her head against his shoulder, and he didn't pull away. The stars blinked above, soft now, curious, even kind. And in the hush between them, Cale whispered, You ain't what happened to you. Elara smiled, eyes closing. Neither are you. Weeks passed. The fence held. So did the herbs. Mint took root and spread. The goats calmed. And slowly, the town forgot the story they thought they knew. Cale and Elara didn't speak of marriage. They didn't have to. She stayed, not because she had nowhere else, but because she chose the place where no one asked her to kneel. She cooked. He fixed. She read out loud by the fire. He carved her a box from pine lined with scraps of old cloth where she kept the first coin he dropped at her husband's feet. Not because it bought her, but because it had ended something. On Sunday, she stood outside the house in a clean blue dress. Her scars were fading, her hair tied back with a ribbon Kyle had found in a drawer. He joined her, shirt clean, eyes brighter than they'd been in years. "What now?" she asked. He looked out across the fields, the fence, the cabin, the life they had stitched together from silence and splinters. "We make new things," he said. She smiled. "And when folks ask who I am," he took her hand, gentle as dawn. "You tell him you're the woman who walked through fire and stayed." And when she turned to go back inside, her bare feet left soft prints in the dust. The dirt remembered, but it didn't define her anymore. And neither did he, because some homes aren't built from timber or stone. They're made from the quiet, steady hands that held you when no one else would. And in that place, no one laughed. They just loved.